Hey, what is going on, YouTube? Aaron here. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys are having a fantastic Wednesday. I believe it will be when this video drops. But I wanted to do this educational one here for you guys on the game mode Epicenter on Islands of Ice, as we recently had a match in the Venezia, which I will link in the description down below, sort of talking about that. But I just wanted to do this one because I feel like every time I get the game mode Epicenter, it feels like the player base completely forgets you know, which way is up and left. And anyway, I mean, that's probably every game mode, but Epicenter seems to be the one that people don't have even the slightest grasp on for the most part. And it's pretty simple. And as always, guys, there will be a bunch of variance, a bunch of nuance with each game you play, even if it is domination or what have you. But talking about Epicenter here, and I'm going to break this video down essentially into 3 parts, talking about each class of ship and kind of the roles you should fulfill regardless of the game mode, but especially in Epicenter. And of course, starting with destroyers here. And again, this is all going to vary even by the number of destroyers and number of cruisers, etc. But if you are a destroyer and you spawn on the middle in Epicenter, you have essentially one job. Now, this is going to be very difficult to just get across to players, but you have to contest this Epicenter at least initially and then determine what the enemy players are doing. The best case scenario, right? You go into the Epicenter, you get all 3 caps for free, the enemy doesn't contest, you are off to a massive early advantage. Now, one thing to be very wary of on this map is all 3 of these lanes here are great zoning torpedo lanes. So most destroyers, and we just had a game, I believe, in the Holland actually, where I was contesting the Epicenter on the opposite flank here, and there was an enemy Shima, and he was filling each one of these gaps with torpedoes. So something you have to be cautious of. But as soon as I spawn middle in a destroyer in Epicenter, I go to one of these islands here, throwing zoning torpedoes along the way. After that, it is essentially a cat and mouse game, trying to, let the enemy destroyer make a mistake. If you go beyond this center line very early on in Epicenter, you're essentially dead. Now, of course, if you spawn out here on the flank, and you take a very wide flank, you could potentially get behind those players. But by the time you reach up here, and let's say the enemy has capped the Epicenter, you're down 150, 200 points. Epicenter starts at 450 points there, so if you allow that to be triple capped for 3, 4, 5 minutes, it's pretty common in Epicenter, if you don't get any of the caps early on and allow the enemy a triple cap, to see the game over at the 7-minute mark or sooner. So again, I know some people are like, well, you don't pay my bills, you don't tell me how to play, and I get that. It's a video game, who cares, right? You move on to the next game. But I can't tell you how frustrating it is in a 9v9 game when your teammates just aren't really cooperating or playing in a team-oriented fashion. So if you're in a destroyer, at least contest the Epicenter. Again, it is your job to spot, it is your job to cap. After that, in a destroyer, your goal is to try and eliminate other destroyers, or at least spot them for your team so they can eliminate them, which is another huge key point for cruisers and battleships. Anytime an enemy destroyer is spotted, please shoot at them. It makes life as a destroyer player so much easier. And again, something else to note, right? If your team isn't supporting you, okay, let's say the opposite is true. You don't get this triple cap. There's another destroyer. It's a Z-52 or a Gdansk or a really strong pan-European. It's got radar. It's got sonar. Play these outer zone here on these 2 caps and allow them, like we talked about, to make a mistake. If the destroyer player is aggressive, they will try and push into you. So, if you take that defensive position where you're angled away, and hopefully your cruiser and battleship are in positions, right around here, right? Can I grab my little picture? No, I don't think so. But anyway, hopefully they're in positions here, setting up a little crossfire like we've talked about before in the triangle offense, right? If you have a cruiser here and a battleship here, they're basically, there's not an angle that this destroyer can have to protect himself from, even if he, utilizes this islands. If you set up, the triangle offense that we talk about, splitting up and creating crossfires. So after that, allow the enemy destroyer to make a mistake and then go back and capture the Epicenter. You should not allow a triple cap. Now, if the enemy gets the inner zone and you're contesting the outer 2, and again, a little asterisk point I want to add in here. once you're in the middle, you capture each zone. So you don't have to be in each respective cap, and this little graphic here doesn't display each zone of the epicenter. But the further you go into the epicenter, for example, if you're in the middle ring, you will capture the middle and the outer ring. So just something to keep in mind. But beyond that, and again, let's say maybe you do go out here and take a little flank and the enemy captures it. As soon as they capture it, and that's sometimes actually a strategy I will use, I will allow them to capture it, and then I will move back into the middle there. I will move back in after, because sometimes when they capture it, they will leave the epicenter. So that's, another little strategy you should keep in mind. But the main point of this is to not let it go triple capped for more than 2 to 3 minutes. At that point, you've lost a massive advantage, and the game is sometimes essentially over. Now, moving on to cruisers here. And again, the role of cruisers are the most versatile class in this game. You have many different types. And again, with the addition of the Schroeder and the Michelangelo, we have now brawling secondary cruisers. So a wide variety of ships. But for the most part, if I spawn in the middle here, I'm trying to take this little section of sea, and look this way, watching out for crossfires, watching my broadside, and also keeping my eyes and my guns faced on this way to shoot any, crossing battleships or cruisers and any destroyers that make their way into the cap, which is why it is so essential for destroyers to go and spot those teammates. Now, again, this is when we talk about variance and nuance, there after, the first 5 minutes or so, depending on what happens to your team, if they all die over here, you've got to move this way. You've got to, defend this island, defend this flank. A lot of players will kind of sneak their way through here, which, again, this is a great island to utilize, or work their way around this, because you are protected from these crossfires while also delivering the crossfires on this flank, which, again, why it is so vital that you play the side you spawn on, okay? Now, again, talking about, and this is where there's a huge amount of variance, even more so than domination with Epicenter here, because let's say that your destroyers spawn. Let's say you have 2 destroyers in the game. One spawns out here and one spawns out here. Okay, if your destroyer out here to the right goes all the way this way, as the destroyer to the left, you essentially have to take over the role of the destroyer in the middle, and vice versa. There should never be a point in time where if there are 2 destroyers in the game, that each of them are fucking off over here on the left and right. But that being said, it is always a good idea to split up your forces. So, if you see your destroyer on the right going for the epicenter, maybe fill up, this void over here. Or, and again, there's multiple variants here as we draw our little arrow. Take a little curve, and flank and get this, potentially in this backside island here, depending on what ships spawn out here. And also potentially double teaming the destroyers in the middle. It's really... Epicenter is one of those game modes where you just have to play it a few times to get the feel for it and see what your team needs. It's difficult to judge sometimes what your friendlies are going to do, and especially what the enemies are going to do. But if if you're playing out here and your destroyer goes to the epicenter and goes down right away, you've got to go fill that void. But anyway, let's finish on talking about the cruiser position here on the middle, and then we'll talk about other things. So like I said, if I'm a cruiser, I'm out here playing these islands here so I can have or this open ocean here so I can have crossfires here and here. If I'm over here on the right, I'm taking one of these islands, okay? I'm making sure that we don't get flanked over here. This island, sometimes it's not wide enough for people to really not pay attention to it. There's often battles and engagements over here. So I'm taking these islands, looking at crossfires here, here, and here. This is kind of... This, mountain range here often secludes you from the rest of the battle, so you are relatively protected here. And that, especially if, you take a position like this island here, is pretty good for developing all of these crossfires. And the same thing goes for a battleship, right? Now, if I'm a battleship, I'm, potentially taking an inward track here to get these crossfires over here, depending on what ship I'm in. Or I'm just straight lining it for the edge of the map. If I'm in a brawling battleship, I'm kind of, again... multiple different amounts of variance and nuance, but I'm taking this position over here to push over and just get the continual crossfires and not worry about getting crossfired or putting myself in the middle of the map. Far too often you will see battleships like YOLO rush into the epicenter, and it's like you just put yourself in the biggest crossfire, like They're getting defend ribbons, they're getting free damage, you're probably permanently spotted. So while, yes, you do need to contest the epicenter later on in the game if you are a cruiser or battleship and your destroyers go down, or, the points are close, YOLO rushing into the epicenter right away is more of an idiotic play than sitting at the back of the map. Again, once you're dead, you cannot further influence the game, which is why I always tell you guys to try, obviously you need to utilize your HP appropriately, but try and survive as long as possible while still helping out your team. Okay, so let's move on to the left here. Like I talked about, if you're in a destroyer, see what your team needs. If you need to go in the epicenter, do so. If not, take these islands out here. You got permanent spots on all of these ships out here and some decent torpedo lanes. And again, if you can work your way, out on this flank, you can even torpedo the backside of the island. We had a situation like that the other day. In Holland, I believe, where we got some decent torpedoes on this region over there. Now, if I'm in a cruiser, again, on this flank over here, I'm trying to take one of these island positions, okay? If I can take this island, I see there's no ships over here, I can move up to this island, or even go back to this side of the island here, and basically you just want to corridor the enemy. You never want to group up, with the exception of, a double destroyer engagement in the middle of the epicenter early on. Because when you group up, you remove all of those advantages that we talked about. So again, if I'm in a cruiser, I'm trying to play one of these two islands. This is a great one right here, and see what the enemy does, okay? If they've got ships out here, you need to engage those ships first, hopefully win those engagements. And as always, right, if the enemy decides that this is the flank they want to, take, say they take or put 5 or 6 ships over here, you need to kite, right? You need to kite towards the back of the map. Not only are you drawing them away from the epicenter, but you're drawing them into the crossfire of your team. And this is where Legends can become insanely frustrating. We had a game in the Petra the other day where I quite literally distracted 4 ships and a carrier, and none of my teammates developed that crossfire. So if you see, 5 enemy ships sailing in this direction, you have to obliterate those crossfires. I can't tell you sitting in this position right here how good a lot of these crossfires are, because these ships kind of think they're safe bow tanking your ships out here. So, once they move beyond this island, they are all but broadside to you, and we've gotten some beautiful shots on ships doing that. And again, in a battleship, you're kind of just playing off of what your team is doing. If your cruiser takes this island, potentially think about, this position here or even further out. It's difficult sometimes when there's a map like this and there's just one center island that really has a lot of the cover and the position. You don't want to take yourself too far out of the fight, but you also don't want to double up without reading the situation first. Now, again, if there's 3-4 ships over here and they're sailing broadside, you don't double up on this island. But depending on the situation, support your destroyer teammate, and that goes without saying. And then make the decision to either push this flank or push into the epicenter, utilizing this this island right here for cover. Okay, and then moving on over here to the right to kind of finish up the long session of Mr. Yapatron here, aka Aaron. Once again, if I'm a cruiser, as I mentioned earlier, I'm taking this island over here, looking at the position of the enemy. Hopefully your destroyer, if they do spawn over here and there is one in the middle taking the epicenter, they go out to this region and spot. This is a very common, watch out for zoning torpedoes. This is such an open part, and when this map is, the game mode is domination, this is, I think, the C cap or whatever cap it is here, is ripe grounds for zoning torpedoes. I always throw torpedoes into this cap. And once again, depending on what the enemy does, you can go out here and take this island. This is actually a great island. It's not too far out there. And again, talking about taking a flank, in the video yesterday, we actually spawned up on this region over here in the Venezia, and we took this group of islands out here in our Venezia, developing all of these crossfires on the enemies that were kind of just, sitting in this region right here. And this goes back to the Facebook post in which I saw where it said, don't go out too far wide and abandon the middle. You really need to hold the middle. And while I agree with that, getting a flank when you spawn on the flank is a huge advantage if you know what you're doing, right? If you take this flank and the map is cut off here due to the graphic and you go up here, yeah, you're fucking off and you're not helping your team. But if you can take this island, get the broadsides here, move up, to this position. Now, depending on where the enemy is back here, you can move up to any one of these islands and have just a glorious crossfire with some decent, you can pop in and out of these islands here. let's pretend we're, in wanted, curving the shots around the islands. But you can, pop in and out of cover, concealment here, or even go to something like this and just get some beautiful, beautiful crossfires on the enemy. Once again, guys, there is so much variance and so much nuance, but you have to, the main point of this video, I guess, is not giving up the epicenter too quickly or without contesting it in some way. I know that it's a video game and a lot of people are like, well, I'll just kind of play how I want. And I get that, right? Play for fun. You don't have to take it that seriously. But this is a team-oriented objective game. There are 8 other players on your team, and I always use the analogy of pick up basketball or pick up sports, right? You don't have to be Michael Jordan or Tom Brady, but you have to know the rules of the game, in order to play at your local YMCA, right? If you pick up the basketball and you start kicking it and running down the court, not dribbling, they're going to ask you to leave. And I think there needs to be some, form of sportsmanship the same way for any online video game. You don't have to be the best, but, just play in a team-oriented fashion, right? Try and contest or try and get the crossfires. If you fail, you try again the next game. But far too often we see, 8 ships either YOLO into the epicenter or 8 ships are nowhere to be found supporting the epicenter. So again, it's always PTFO, play the fucking objective is the common phrase. So just make sure you're doing that or developing a strategy to support your team in doing so, right? If you're taking these flanks out here, make sure you are firing on the destroyers or distracting the enemy or getting that crossfire for the enemy who is in the epicenter. But that is the video for you guys here. I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving. I think we're going to have a few videos for Thanksgiving and a few streams. But anyway, that is, like I said, the video there. I hope you guys found that educational, informative. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Again, my strategy isn't the 100% certified way to do it, but I believe it is a little bit better than just YOLO rushing blindly into positions without really thinking about crossfires, etc. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys. If you guys like these in-depth tutorials, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that YouTuber bullshit. Love you guys. I'm out. Peace.